Okay, so today we're going to dive deep into the life and times of Jeff Bezos.
Sounds good.
He's really one of the most impactful figures of the digital age, right? I mean, you can't really tell the story of the internet without talking about him.
No, not at all. He's certainly left his mark.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of material here, articles, interviews, all sorts of things, tracing his journey from, those early days all the way to where he is now.
It's fascinating stuff, really. I mean, it's quite the story.
Yeah, and what we really want to do is try to unpack, what were those key moments, the turning points, the decisions that kind of shaped his trajectory.
Right. And ultimately, what kind of impact has he had? Because it's multifaceted, right? It's not just one thing. It's across so many different areas.
Absolutely. So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. His early life, we're talking Princeton, computer science, then Wall Street. I mean, it's kind of a classic start for someone who ends up, a titan of industry.
Yeah. You could say it's a familiar path in a way.
Yeah.
But even then, looking back, you can see that even in those early days, he wasn't just following the typical script.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, take his computer science background. It wasn't just about learning to code, it was about developing a way of thinking. A system thinking approach, that ability to look at complex systems and figure out how they work, how to scale them up. I mean, that's crucial for what he did with Amazon.
Right.
And then Wall Street. I mean, that gave him the financial acumen, the understanding of, large scale operations.
Yeah.
All of that was really important for his later success.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then we get to 1994. He's doing well on Wall Street. He's got a good career ahead of him, and he decides to chuck it all and start an online bookstore. I mean, come on, that was a pretty wild idea at the time, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the internet was still so new back then. Most people didn't even really know what it was. But Bezos, he saw the potential. He saw that it could be a way to revolutionize retail.
Yeah, but why books specifically?
Well, think about it. Traditional bookstores, you're limited by space. You know how many books you can physically fit on shelves? But online, the possibilities are endless. You can have millions of titles available at your fingertips.
Right.
And Bezos, he realized that there was this huge, untapped market of people who wanted access to a wider selection of books than what their local bookstore could offer.
And it wasn't just about selection, was it? I mean, I remember back then going to a bookstore and trying to find a specific book. It could be such a pain. You'd have to search through all these shelves, and sometimes it just wasn't there.
Exactly. The internet solved that problem. It made it so much easier to find what you were looking for. I mean, you could just type in the title or the author, and boom, there it was.
So he basically saw the internet as a way to solve a real consumer pain point.
Yeah. And to do it at a scale that had never been seen before.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't just trying to create a slightly better bookstore. He was aiming to change the way people bought everything.
And that's exactly what he did.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So let's talk about that famous origin story. The whole cross-country road trip, the business plan being written on the fly, starting the company out of a garage with a ping pong table for a desk. It's almost like a Silicon Valley cliche at this point, right?
Yeah, it's become this legendary tale, has it? But it also says a lot about Bezos' personality. That combination of vision and hustle, that willingness to take risks and to just get things done.
Right. I mean, it also shows that you don't need a fancy office or a ton of resources to start something big.
Exactly. Sometimes all you need is a good idea and a lot of passion.
And from that humble garage, Amazon just took off. I mean, the growth was incredible, the IPO in 97, and then they started expanding into all these other areas, electronics, cloud computing with AWS, even original TV shows. I mean, they just kept pushing the boundaries.
And that's another one of Bezos' key traits, that willingness to experiment, to constantly innovate, to never stand still.
Right, he wasn't content with just being the biggest bookstore in the world. He wanted to be the everything store.
Exactly. And what's really interesting about that is that they often started by solving their own problems. They needed more computing power to run their business. So they created AWS and then realized, hey, other companies could use this too. And it became this whole other massive business for them.
Yeah, that was a brilliant move. And it really speaks to his ability to think ahead, to see the bigger picture. I mean, not many people would have looked at their internal IT infrastructure and thought, hey, there's $1 billion business here.
But that's what sets him apart. He's got this incredible knack for spotting opportunities that others miss.
And all of this led to, Amazon becoming this behemoth, this global force, and Bezos becoming the richest man in the world by 2017. I mean, it's an incredible story of success.
It really is. And it's funny, even the Amazon logo has this hidden meaning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that arrow that goes from A to Z. It's not just a smile. It's meant to represent that they sell everything from A to Z.
Oh, I never knew that. That's a great little detail.
Yeah, it's a reminder of that ambition that was there from the very beginning.
So let's talk about his leadership style, because that's another thing that people are always fascinated by. We hear about this day one philosophy, this idea of always acting like it's the first day of the company. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it's about maintaining a sense of urgency. Never getting complacent, always being willing to challenge the status quo. It's about staying nimble and innovative, even when you're a massive corporation.
Right, so it's not just about being fast, it's about having that startup mentality even when you're a giant.
Exactly. It's about resisting the urge to become bureaucratic and slow moving, which can happen to any large organization.
Okay, but we also hear these stories about Amazon's work culture being incredibly intense. A real pressure cooker environment. How does that square with the whole day one thing?
Yeah, that's one of the more controversial aspects of Bezos' legacy.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that he sets incredibly high standards, and that can create a very demanding work environment.
And there have been reports, about workers feeling burnt out, about the pressure to meet unrealistic quotas.
Right, and that raises questions about, whether that level of intensity is sustainable in the long term, and whether it comes at the expense of employee well-being.
And then there's the whole customer obsession thing, that famous story about Bezos leaving an empty chair in meetings to represent the customer.
Yeah, that's a classic Bezos move.
Yeah.
It's a very visual way of reminding everyone that the customer is always the top priority.
But at the same time, we've seen those reports about conditions in Amazon warehouses, workers having to pee in bottles because they don't have time for bathroom breaks. It doesn't really seem like putting the customer first, does it?
No, it doesn't. And that's where the disconnect comes in. It's one thing to say that you're customer obsessed, but it's another thing to actually create a work environment that supports that.
Right. I mean, if your workers are being treated poorly, that's going to impact the customer experience eventually.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance between meeting the needs of the customer and treating your employees fairly.
And then there's this whole idea of thank God it's Monday, which we hear associated with Amazon sometimes. This idea of people being so passionate about their work that they're actually excited to come in on Monday morning.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of the culture. But again, it raises questions about, is that genuine enthusiasm or is it pressure? Is it people feeling like they have to work all the time?
Right. Where's the line between a strong work ethic and burnout?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Okay, so we've talked about the good and the bad, but there's no denying that Amazon has been incredibly successful. I mean, they dominate e-commerce. They're a leader in cloud computing. They're even making waves in Hollywood.
They're everywhere, aren't they?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
And it all goes back to that vision that Bezos had. He saw the potential of the internet before most people did, and he was relentless in pursuing it.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the more personal stuff. Bezos has obviously become a tabloid fixture over the years.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely not shy of the spotlight.
I mean, the 2019 divorce from Mackenzie Scott, that was huge news, not just because of the amount of money involved, but also because of what Mackenzie did afterward.
Right. She became this incredible philanthropist, giving away billions of dollars to all sorts of causes. It's a really interesting contrast to Bezos' own approach to philanthropy.
Yeah, and then there's his current relationship with Lauren Sanchez, which has also generated a lot of headlines. It seems like his personal life is almost as fascinating to people as his business dealings.
Well, that's what happens when you're one of the most famous people on the planet, I guess.
Right.
People are always going to be interested in what you're doing.
Okay, so beyond the personal stuff, there are also a lot of controversies surrounding Amazon. The antitrust lawsuits, the accusations of union busting, the scrutiny of their tax practices. I mean, these are serious issues.
Oh, absolutely. And they raise important questions about the role of big tech in society.
Yeah.
How much power should these companies have? What are their responsibilities to their workers, to the public?
Right. I mean, Amazon has become so big that it's almost like a government unto itself.
Yeah, and with that size comes a lot of scrutiny.
And then there's the criticism of Bezos himself, people saying that he's hoarding wealth while his own employees are struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, that's a common critique of billionaires, isn't it? This idea that they've accumulated more wealth than any one person could ever need, while others are struggling just to survive.
Right, and it fuels that debate about wealth inequality. Should there be limits on how much wealth any one person can have?
It's a complex issue for sure.
Okay, so on the flip side, Bezos has also made some significant philanthropic commitments, most notably the $10 billion Bezos Earth Fund, which is focused on climate change.
Yeah, that's a huge investment.
Yeah.
And it's great to see him putting his money towards such an important cause.
But at the same time, Amazon's own carbon footprint is massive. I mean, they're one of the biggest polluters in the world, so it's kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It raises the question of, Can you really offset your own environmental damage by throwing money at the problem?
Right, or is it more about making fundamental changes to the way you operate?
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure.
So let's talk about what Bezos has been up to since stepping down as CEO of Amazon in 2021, because he hasn't exactly retired to a quiet life, has he?
No, not at all. It seems like he's just shifted his focus to some of his other passions, like space exploration with Blue Origin.
Yeah, Blue Origin, that's his rocket company, right? They've got some pretty ambitious goals talking about space colonization and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting though because they're kind of playing catch up to SpaceX in a lot of ways.
Right, SpaceX seems to be further ahead in terms of technology and achievements.
Yeah, but it's still early days in the space race. Who knows what the future holds?
True enough. And then there's his ownership of the Washington Post, which he bought back in 2013.
Yeah, that was a big move, and it really shows his interest in media and journalism.
Right. It's a powerful platform to have, and it gives him a lot of influence.
For sure. And of course, there are his personal investments, that $500 million super yacht, the extensive real estate holdings. I mean, he's living the life.
Yeah, he's definitely not hurting for money.
Not at all.
So as we look back on his career, it's really hard to sum it all up in a neat little package, isn't it? I mean, he's such a complex figure. He's achieved so much, but he's also been incredibly controversial.
Yeah, he's definitely not a one-dimensional character.
Right. So how do we ultimately judge him? Is he a visionary genius, a ruthless capitalist, or something in between?
I think it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
He's undoubtedly brilliant and innovative, but he's also driven by profit, and he's not afraid to make tough decisions.
Yeah, and his impact on the world is undeniable, both positive and negative.
Absolutely. He's changed the way we live in so many ways, but he's also created some problems along the way.
So I guess the question for each of us is, what part of his legacy will we remember most? Will it be the convenience of Amazon Prime, the promise of space travel, or the concerns about worker exploitation and climate change?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It really is. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of Jeff Bezos. It's been quite a journey.
My pleasure. It was fascinating to really dig into his story.
And for all of you listening out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What's your take on Jeff Bezos? What do you think his lasting impact will be? Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, we're always interested to hear your perspectives.
All right, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.
Until then.
Take care. Bye.